Hello, world. How are you? This is Steve Figurelli from New Jersey, welcoming you to our first installment of our uh, Achieve the Core Student Achievement Partners Interstate webinar series. Just wanted to give a brief introduction around the series itself so we could share the big idea and then get right into the content with an amazing facilitator, Tina Monteleone from New Jersey. So a bit about the series that we'll be facilitating monthly over the foreseeable future. College and career standards give educators an opportunity to work together and support each other across districts, states, and content areas. And this project is a merger of about a dozen states coming together to share research, best practice, and resources available to support all students. And the goal of our Core Advocates Network, which I'll get into momentarily more, is to engage educators with content knowledge and resources that you can support and transition toward a college and career-ready education. So today, we have Tina Monteleone from the Point Pleasant School District in New Jersey with us to share a webinar around text complexity. And so Tina Monteleone holds a master's in education and teaches educational technology and special education courses to graduate and undergraduate students on the university level. A KA teacher herself and technology integration specialist here in New Jersey, Tina also practices as a certified dyslexia and Orton Gillingham reading therapist. Additionally, she is involved in several statewide educational organizations where she contributes to planning, development, and communication of instructional best practices. She presents at various conferences throughout the state for organizations such as the New Jersey Association of Middle Level Educators, NJASCD, the ESET2 NJPA, IDA, and for the New Jersey Standards Advocates. We're asking, as you learn alongside of us today, that you tweet using hashtag Core Advocates to share out any aha moments, any wonderings, any questions. There's a live chat also to the right of your screen on the YouTube live channel, and I will be moderating that throughout the webinar this afternoon. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tina to begin today's webinar on text complexity. Tina, it's all yours.
Thanks, Steve. How's it looking on your end? You got my presentation up and ready to roll?
Looks great.
Okay, great. All right, well, welcome everyone. First disclaimer up, as much as I am excited to be here, I'm also a little nervous. I do love presenting and being with people in a room, but here I am by myself, so I don't even know why I'm a little bit nervous about being by myself today. But I'm excited that you're with me wherever you are. And I'm excited to sort of share what I know and some of my passions about literacy. And hopefully we will end up with some new learning and some takeaways that possibly tomorrow you'll be chatting about or trying in your classroom. So let's kind of get started here. Now, so today's learning purpose is going to be not only to talk about text complexity and its components, but what do we do with it? How do we get it infused into our classroom? And how do we do it in a correct way, in a purposeful way? I will tell you that my question was, like, who would be visiting this webinar today? We've been talking about text complexity for quite some time now since we shifted to the Common Core. So thinking about you, the audience, I was trying to put together just some information to either refresh what you already knew or sort of revisit what we started to talk about a few years back with the Common Core shifts, and sort of bring us to today and seeing what are we really doing now? What resources do we have? And as we go through that, and we get beyond kind of talking about the why and the how, we're going to get to the what, which is that piece of what can we use to get our classrooms running with more text complexity. So here's my question, and it's like Simon Sinek, who I really love, He's a great author, speaker, and he speaks about always starting with the why. And if we don't start with the why, then it's kind of a slippery slope. We're really not sure why we're doing what we're doing in our classrooms, So I kind of want to look at, why is text complexity still a conversation? And so if we kind of look at this from different perspectives here are some of the major whys that I think about when I'm concerned about the text that I'm putting in front of students, or when I'm talking to teachers about what's going on in their classroom. And so, text complexity, it's going to affect the vocabulary that we're using in our classrooms and our students, and it's going to impact their knowledge and help them build that knowledge base that we need them to have. It's going to make them more independent readers and more proficient readers. So in the end, look at all these great byproducts of being concerned about text complexity in our classrooms and focusing on the why here. And of course, if we get all these pieces, correct and together, we've got that great critical thinking piece that's going to come in the end, that connection, that meaning of the text, and really that's where our ultimate goal with that. So let's start where it all began with the Common Core shifts. And again, these slides may look very familiar to you. I am just sort of annotating and revamping and sort of pumping up the conversation a little bit. So when we look at this slide, and the point of it is that, where did this come from? Where did our conversations, where does it come from in the Common Core standards? And so we know it is a component of the literacy standards. It's coming out of the reading, and it's coming from that text complexity and growth and comprehension. But the red circle is really key, because it's not just sitting in the world of ELA. It's sitting in all content areas, right? So this is a concern of science teachers. This is a concern of social studies teachers. This is everyone's concern, right? We're in this together. And so I'm hoping that there's a bunch of different type of educators here today to kind of hear that message. So here comes the warning. So when we first, going back to the Common Core shifts, and we started to deep dive and unpack and look at all that was going to be placed in front of us, I think that looking at this was one of the scariest things that I had to look at. And just going back and looking at it again, and I wondered, wow, how did I handle that coming at me? How did my team handle this information coming at me? And I just kind of revisited this diagram about how we have this major shift in lexile ranges. And so I put these arrows here because maybe at the time it was just so painful to look at, but I was looking at, some of these cross sections here. And I think it's maybe hitting me more now when I look at it again, that we had this shift, major shift, where the top lexile number of 1010 of 8th grade now became the top end here of 5th grade. That was just a major, that had a major impact when you kind of think about it as a shift. Then we can kind of look back here again, and we're looking at the beginning of high school, right? It used to be 960, and now where is 960? 960 is floating somewhere back in here, right? So those two alone, this intersection, and kind of looking at where high school used to begin, and now where it begins, is quite a continual shout out. Are we getting this done or not, right? How many years later? And then we can kind of look at this number here, right? This number reflects where our students need to be in order to sit in a college classroom and actually do what they have to do, actually understand, actually obtain meaning from text without too many barriers. And being the mom of 2 college students and seeing what they had to go through, you know, what the expectation that was placed upon them, this was a humongous gap. So, you know, we still have work to do for sure. So, the starting point, how do we know we're getting this work done? So when we look at the text that we're already using, you know, we have to kind of start there by assessing that text. You know, when we think about, you know, where we are, where we want to go, the next step is the other kind of text we want to put in front of our students. We have to know how to look at those when we make our selection. So in assessing, again, we come back to this 3-part model. And I think in pulling this information together, I have a new appreciation for this 3-prong approach because I think that before one component and not the other. And now I'm feeling pretty good about this, understanding it, utilizing it, and looking at it in a more holistic approach. So let's revisit some of these things. So we have sort of a garden to grow of understanding, especially if you're kind of want to refresh this a little bit, or, you know, maybe there's someone on here who hasn't been exposed to some of these things, you know. Who knows if some of these things are not being covered clearly enough in higher ed and the education programs. And, you know, once somebody gets out into a job, sometimes we're way too busy to kind of go back and check on, or, you know, with our new teachers and all. So hopefully if this is the first time seeing it, I'll do it some justice. So let's look at one of the first components that we look at. And when we say, well, this is the easiest one to look at, you know, it's quantitative, right? It's measurable. And many of our school systems, you know, are using things to help measure lexiles and things like that. You know, we have websites and programs that can do that, right? They take the text and they can actually quantitatively analyze it and look for, you know, sentence lengths and syntax and things like that. So that's something we know as the readability. And for any given text, if you wanted to find out the readability, you know, there are websites that do it and software that do it, and that's going to give us that lexile that we need. Yet, when we talk about lexiles, we have to be cautious because it's not the end all, right? And I think maybe when we first were so busy shifting with the Common Cores that many of us, you know, were realigning our book assortments and in our rooms, and we were just so focused on the numbers, and then we forgot that, wow, there's other components that we have to take into consideration. And so lexiles are not the only, you know, thing we want to focus on. And we don't want to focus on saying, oh, these are the only lexiles that we can have in this classroom, or, oh, those lexiles are second and third grade, because we've also found out that we can introduce higher lexiles in different grades by just shifting the way that we do it. And so we can have those higher lexiles done as read alouds, right? So a kindergarten classroom should hear read alouds that come out of maybe second and third, and those lexile bands, those ranges there. So when we think about Lexiles, it's not the end all. It's just a piece of what we want to offer. The other thing, when we talk about Lexiles and comprehension, we have found there's research out there that has shown that when a student has some background knowledge in an area, it could also shift, what they're reading, even if it is beyond that current sweet spot they're in as far as Lexiles are concerned. So we, again, have to just keep that in mind. So our second component here is the qualitative, right? So teachers really, this is the, now we move away from the machine in a sense, and now the teacher's really deeply involved. And, this has to do with, what we are kind of looking at as far as a measurement of text, but from the human perspective. And it's better viewed if we look at, it's a lot to consider. So when we look at that quality of text, right, we're looking at the qualitative component. There's so much that goes into it. And that's why it requires us to really have a hand in it, right? So when we're looking at, up here in this quadrant here, we're looking at that figurative language, the density of that, that levels of meaning. How's that going to impact? We can go to structure, right? And we can see right off the bat, oh, this structure is not something that my student's ready for or has had exposure to, right? We can come down here and we know that the language coming out of this novel or this text is again, really way too complex when I put it with the other couple components where I'm measuring that text complexity. And this one here seems to be, when I think about it, when I've looked at my students, I've spent a lot of time in this quadrant here, looking at what do my students know already? What this text is going to be demanding because they don't have that background knowledge or prior understanding, right? Maybe it's something to do with their cultural background or something to do with the text in itself, and we do understand the impact as far as vocabulary. When we look at that, we can start to think about, wow, how are my students going to access this vocabulary, whether it's, content-based or academic vocabulary. So we kind of have to think about that as we're taking that into consideration. And so when we look at those things like prior knowledge and background information that they need to know and that vocabulary, there is a correlation, right, between text complexity and that text difficulty, right? So given at the wrong time, given at that wrong point of entry where we need our students to access text, that text complexity is going to have worse factors on a text being difficult. Okay, so I want you to kind of think about that when we talk about, text complexity versus text difficulty. All right, so here we are, we're at the final part, right? That 3-part model, we're at number 3. And so this is that reader and task, right? So this is where, we know our readers, we kind of start to think about, that purpose of what we want our readers to do, that we want, what kind of tasks are we going to put in front of them. Again, putting this along with the other components can have an effect on how we decide whether or not this text is right or the timing is wrong for our student. We look at this as a task to text measure, as I will show you in a little bit, you'll see what I mean as far as the relationship between that task and picking of that text complexity. Okay. So, how do we anticipate? How do we plan for the challenges? How do we look at text? How do we select text for our readers? How do we know the task at hand is going to be matched to the purpose that we have in place? And the one thing that I want to kind of right out front is this myth buster, right? So think back when we first shifted to the Common Core and we saw all this stuff about text complexity and the Lexile pumping up. I think that we all did this. First thing we started to do is like to start to grab more complex text and try to get them into our rooms, right? We did that. We talked about that. We shifted our book assortments, and that just didn't do it. I mean, we're like, okay, well, this is not a purposeful way, right? So just because, we're putting the difficult text in front of our students doesn't mean that they're going to be better readers. But some assistance and doing it in a scaffold way, we can get this job done. So we talked about the why, right? So the what of it, right? How am I going to get this done? Where should I start? What am I going to do and utilize? So we have to know the students, right? And so this is what you do really well. I mean, you know your students, right? They're coming to you. You start to think about and start, off to measure where are their Lexiles. You start to think about what they know and they don't know. You start to think about, what you got to get done for the year. And so just keeping that student in mind, knowing what your student needs are and what you want to accomplish for them. The biggest thing you want to start to think about is, how do I create opportunities for them? How do I grow their understanding, their background knowledge? How do I get them to access the text better? How do I get them to transfer their reading skills from one thing to another, right? So that I can start to build that stamina, right? And so one way for you to start to think about is that offering variety of text, right? So mixing it up. In my later slide, I'll reference this again. Text, we want to talk about all kinds of genres. We want to talk about infographics, right? We want to talk about video components. Everything we can get our hands on to really get them to be able to continually practice those reading strategies, those transferred of skills from one type to the other. And a biggest thing that I think aha moment that I had was this idea of layering text, of being able to layer meaning through a group of texts, right? So where I was all concerned about the novels and the those kinds of things, I started to focus on starting with pieces of text and how they related possibly to what I was trying to accomplish, or the content focus in whatever I was working on or where we were at in that unit. So in bringing bundle of text together, you can really hit a lot of things at one time, right? You can change up the structures, you can change up the complexities, you can change up the vocabulary. So this is just a little shot of one of my lessons that I taught when I started using text sets. And again, this may not be such a new word for you, been really talking about text sets in the last few years. Some of the major companies and resources that we love have been gearing what they're doing also to helping us with text sets resources. And we're going to look at that both from Achieve the Core and from Newsela. But just starting that journey with utilizing sets of text in my classroom with my students was the answer for me, right? So this is just a quick shot of an assignment where we had a set of texts, right, in a thematic unit. And this was a thematic unit about the effects of plastics in our ocean. And in doing that, I was able to select different texts with building complexity, right? And looking at them, right? In selecting text, you want to think about that anchor text, that real complex one, that one that maybe you're going for, right? And how to build on that. And, you know, the different structures. So one was an interview. One was more of an editorial looking one. I also incorporated video into that. And so what they were able to do is once they sort of moved out of that text analysis, then they started to look at the texts together and comparing them in the points of view. So as we built on this, then we were able to kind of move towards that writing response. And when we did, it was such a rich response because the students were able to gain so much meaning and understanding from that scaffolding of text. So when we're looking about that pulling of text and we're analyzing the text, and you know, it's sort of like looking about at a team of text and who's staying and who's off the team, and you kind of have to look as you're pulling the text together. You kind of have to look about, you know, measure, does that text measure up with that task? So simply enough, if the task that you're going for, that purpose that you have, whether it's something complex like, you know, the purpose of talking about symbolism, all right, maybe you want them to you know, see shifting in points of view. If that text is complex in that way, or that task that you're looking for is complex, then you want to dial down that complexity of that text you're going to use for that task. All right, so you know, it's kind of twofold. And so if you've ever seen some of the, you know, fabulous work of Pernille Rip, who, you know, talks to us about using picture books in middle school. And so that's a fantastic way to start to build students' understanding for whether it is looking for theme or author's purpose, just by starting with texts that are more accessible, as opposed to starting with a complex text and you're trying to get it all done at once. We'll kind of revisit this as we go. So we got to build that text complexity muscle, right? So we have to build up, right? We have to get our students more comfortable as we try to give them more complex text, right? Building that stamina for them. And so here we arrive at, once again, close reading, right? Again, you're like, Tina, you're not telling me something I haven't already heard. Well, you know what? I love talking about close reading. I love to go back to this. You know, again, we're a few years into this, and now we've got lots of different points of view on close reading, right? So, but this is really the how, you know, and Doug Fisher helps us with this. So many wonderful people help us with talking about close reading. But, you know, this is really how we get it done. And close reading, we know, is rereading. And so Doug Fisher likes to make that point of saying, Kids, when they're growing up, they love, rereading the same books over and over. And then when they get to school, then we tell them they can't reread, right? But when we want them to be able to access complex text, we want to engage in close reading. And so, we want to look at short passages to start to get this done. We're building muscle, right? We don't start with a 50-pounder to do our biceps. We're going to start with 15, maybe 20, right? And we're going to build it with short passages, right? And we're going to reread in a purposeful way, right? We're going to annotate, right? So read with a pencil is in quotes because, we can digitally read with a pencil, right? By annotating. And we want to keep that focus, right? Also on those text-dependent questions. And so when we look at what multiple readings are going to look like, it's that scaffold, right? So the first read is going to be real literal, and it's going to kind of get that gist and get that idea of what the text is about. Going to be that first layer, right? Like peeling an onion, right? And so then we're going to kind of go back to that next read, which will be that more structural read. What's going on with this text? How is this text structured, right? That's where I'm going to start to dig in with my annotation piece, right? And then as we kind of come out of that, we're going to be more ready. Our students are going to be more ready for those more inferential conversations, right? So as we look at that multiple read and the rereading, it's funny how it lines up with that same thing we're looking for, right, on that R end, on that questioning end, right? So we want to kind of have that feel for how those two match up. So as we are building our text-dependent questions, we want to also layer that and scaffold that as well. And that's where it has a really nice lining up of that close reading to that, sort of letting out of your questions and how more complex and how much more you want from your reader, how much more you want from them to be able to respond to you. So now here's the how. So like at this point, you're saying, okay, come on, Tina, let's go with the how. I knew the why and I knew the what. And so let's get to this how business. Maybe there's something I need to know, something new. So the how is going to be a bunch of different tools. And so I'm going to, at some point, start to pop out of this. And so I can get some of my other tabs open and kind of practice some of my favorite tools and show you a little bit of the resources. And of course, achievethecore.org has fantastic stuff waiting for us there. And they are responding. So a bunch of us sit together and building and helping to build and work in this tech set project, right? So I would encourage you to kind of start, if you haven't dug back to Achieve the Core, in a while, you haven't revisited there, I would go back there and start to take a look at what they've been able to do in the last couple of years as a response. They're continually in a state of response, a state of building resources, right? And so that's why we're here today. So one of the things I like to keep looking for is resources, especially for tech sets, right? And so this would be definitely a place I would tell you to start. Another place that I already know you are, right? Because now I could walk into any room or any presentation and Newsela and Newsela, of course they're part of the conversation. They have worked hard, right, to help teachers and to really understand education. I mean, those people working at Newsela spend a lot of time, learning themselves. And this past summer, they have worked really hard at building new units and new tech sets. So oftentimes If I am pulling some things from Achieve the Core, I'll come over to New ZLA and kind of look and see what do they got going over there, right? Because they are continually building as well as a response to teachers. So I encourage you to check out their bank of text sets, right? And what do we know about New ZLA? We have that leveling, right? That Lexile component that we can then, go in and select. And so that's where our stamina building can come in too. If you pick 3 texts and you shift the levels, and you're maybe what you're going to call your anchor text is the most complex you're building towards, with New ZLA, you have that tool. Here's some of the things we're going to kind of look at. And at this point, I'm going to kind of pop out and we'll pop back in. But these are some of the tools I'm going to show you, even from a digital perspective. What other things am I doing along with to achieve the core? What are the Google applications? What are the Google add-ons? What kind of other tools am I using besides those banks of resources for text sets? Right. So one of the tools I'm going to start with is the Academic Word Finder, right? And this is on achievethecore.org. I love this. I talk about it every time I'm in a room with educators. And so this is where I want to start with some of just the demonstration piece. So I'm going to kind of check out of here and kind of just start to kind of show you what this tool can do. So if I go and I just kind of open a text, and I had some text open just for the sake of time. And so here's just a text that I just grabbed from Newsella. And what I can do is I can grab a piece of this text. And either you control copy or command copy. I'm going to use this Academic Word Finder. And the why I'm going to use this is because it's going to immediately identify possible problematic words that I have to be aware of. Again, I'm anticipating what's going on with this text. And it's also going to help me utilize it as a tool for my students. So I'm going to paste this in here. I'm going to just select a grade. All right, I'm going to submit it. Now, at some point, it's going to ask me if I want to save this entry, and I will save it. And here's what it did. It actually took the text. It now broke it up. And if you can see here, right, it told me I have 12 academic words below, 8 on grade level, and 5 above, right? So when I look at this and say, this might be an entry-level text, or maybe I want to go up and look and say, in a vocabulary strand, maybe I want this to be a little bit more, okay? Or just, it's going to help me as a tool, but my students can also use this depending on their grade level as their own independent tool. The other thing it's going to do for me too is it's going to break out and give me the vocabulary as well, right? So every time the term is used, right, and I have it as a breakout here. So it's really super, super nice, to have this tool, like this, and to see what took on here. So, and here's just a little piece of the text too. Now, if I wanted to, I could also take this text and in its color-coded manner too, let me open up a Google Doc. I can paste that color-coded text right into a doc and share it that way, right? So that my students are going to already have that identified for them. Get that? Well, here's the vocabulary command. See if I can see it at the top. So here's just a little piece of it, right? So here's the text that it pulled out and identified, right? So I could use that piece of text too and share it with them. And of course, keep in mind, anytime I have anything in a Google Doc, I can then share it out in classroom, right? I could even just share this to my ELL students because, in Google Classroom, we can just select the students, or I can select it to those struggling readers or those students with a reading disability. So keep in mind, this is an awesome tool, right? I can use it as personally as a teacher, or I can also use it, I can show this to my students and it can help them as well. Another tool that I like to use is Rewordify, and that's rewordify.com, right? So one of the things I can go do again is I can grab this text and I'm going to put a portion of it in here. Now, some of the times I like to use these tools together, right? Because they both do different things, but it's the same result at the end. They're helping me analyze the text, right? And they're helping me see it through a lens of, is this going to be complex for my student or not, right? This one does so much more than I'm even going to show you today, but it takes it's identified the complex vocabulary, right, that might impact my students, and then replaces it with a more literal term, right? So if we go back, remember we were talking about that, maybe that entry level text has to be a little bit more literal, right? So, or maybe I have those struggling students that I want them to be able to access the text, and wow, this is a great entry point for them. But if you could see, as I'm hovering over here, it has changed, right? The words. What can I do with this? I could then, again, copy this. I can go into and I'm just going to, for the sake of time, just paste it right in here on top of this other piece, right? So I could put this in here. Again, I could share it out this way, or if I wanted to, I could then make my own adjustments and then help my students this way. It's not perfect, but it's a pretty awesome tool to kind of help me level, have an understanding of where the text may be. And when I use these two tools in tandem, it really can help me in looking at text complexity, selecting a text, and possibly, modifying and changing that text. All right, so I'm going to pop back here and make sure that you know where we've covered already. So we've looked at, right, the academic word finder. We've looked at Rewordify. And so I want to come back to these other little Google tools that I have been using a lot in the past year. And why would these tools be awesome to helping with close reading and text complexity? Is that when we are looking at close reading, whether we're using a pencil or whether we're doing it digitally, we have to look at the tools that we can use for access and entry point and breaking down barriers, right? And so we have to keep that in mind. We have to keep all our students in mind. So one of the things that I like to show my students is an add-on, right? And you can get add-ons by clicking here, and you're going to, right, again, for the sake of time, select reader, right? And what reader will do is I could put, now think about this, a complex text in here, right? I can paste a complex, maybe a more complex text. Maybe this is my first read of that anchor text. Maybe this is the one that I know that might offer the biggest challenge. So maybe I want either a selection of students or all students to actually listen to the text first, right? Now, in the younger grades, that might be pumping up the lexicals with the read aloud, which is also okay in middle school as well, read aloud. But I could also use a tool like this because, and I'm going to try to adjust the volume.
The sun warms us each and every day, but did you know it is also a star? In fact, all the stars in the night sky are suns too.
Now, are there other tools that do this kind of text to speech, yeah. But in a Google environment, add-ons are open for students. And so this would be a great tool to offer my students, especially if I want them to just kind of go through the first time and get some gist, right? And get an idea of how to access that text. Extra thing as I'm sitting here and thinking about it is a word cloud. There's an add-on for a word cloud too in here. And we know about word clouds, right? They've been around a while. Okay, Tina, it's nothing new, but guess what? Word clouds can help with gist too. It would be like you got to get that little warm-up thing going, right? So you got a complex text here, right off the bat, a word cloud, will aggregate, what's going on in that text and help our students to kind of start to warm up to, do I have prior knowledge, right? Do I have any background knowledge in that as I'm about to dive in on that? All right, so just little tools like this, can help that, right? And of course, on the reading side, we want the writing side. And as we start to think about that writing side too, there's that voice typing. Don't dismiss that. It's always there, that tool, and that is a great tool to help our students, access those thoughts in their mind that might be too difficult for them to get down onto paper. So I'm not going to spend time talking about that, but that voice typing tool has done amazing things to students who have a hard time getting their thoughts from their brain to their fingers out to a piece of paper or on a computer. So these tools I use, a lot of these tools I use in tandem. Now, the last thing I will be able to show you here, if you haven't used, or if you're not familiar with Google Keep, one of the ways and a tool I use for close reading, right? So yeah, do I want my kids, with the paper and the pencils? Yeah, I do like that annotation, right? I do like those kinds of annotations, but I also have to. It's sort of a moral imperative. Their world is a digital world. They have to also understand how to do these things digitally, right? Transferring, we have to talk about transferring those skills over to different texts, right? Different levels of texts, different kinds of text. Well, we have to also transfer those skills to digital text in a digital environment. So Google Keep is a sticky board note, right, that students can use. It's part of the G Suite and teachers can use, and they could start to annotate, right? And they can collaborate their sticky notes, right? So this is our amazing tools to help us, with close reading, to help students annotate, to help students access text, to help break down barriers when we're kind of looking at, how do I get the job done? Because we know about the why, right? We've kind of come back to that. So before I kind of wrap up this conversation, I do want to just make sure that I've done a really good job at showing you where a lot of these other resources are. Okay, so we talked about some of the tools already. But if you want more information, don't forget about achievethecore.org, right? There, again, and I say we because I'm part of it. We are working really hard to build this bank of resources and continually keep it fresh. And so go in there and check out, these close reading lesson plans that they have. Go and check out their text complexity tools that they have also to help you with your analysis. There's also great stuff in there if you want to do it as a team of teachers. Maybe you did it 4 or 5 years ago and you're like, I think it's time again, right? Do it as a team. Next articulation, go back in there and take a look at that. The other thing I do want to encourage you to do is think about becoming a core advocate, right? So think about taking their survey, checking out and getting more involved. You know, we have a great group of core advocates, both in ELA and math in the state, and it's a wonderful, wonderful PLN to be involved in. Here's some of the resources. Definitely Achieve the Core has helped me to pull these together. And also Doug Fisher and Sarah Brown Wesling and their stuff. So I want to thank you for spending your Tuesday afternoon. And here in New Jersey, it's wet and it's windy. And I hope wherever you are, it's a much better day. So thank you so much.
So Tina, I just wanted to thank you for such an amazing job tackling such a dynamic topic, specifically explaining not only the why, but the how. I thought that was really skillfully done, and we hope that you have not only learned a lot, but have secured some takeaways with which you could bring back to the classroom to support your students. In fact, as I was listening and learning alongside you, Tina, I had 3 takeaways that I just wanted to share as sort of a recap. And if you had others, feel free to tweet using hashtag core advocates. But the first takeaway, which I thought was so powerful and well said, is that literacy applies to all content areas, and we are all ELA teachers in some capacity. I just think that's really profound when we stop to think about reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and the integral part that all 4 play in all content areas and all disciplines in life. And so I just thought that was really profound. The second was a child is more than a reading level. Poignant and so true. And I think it's oftentimes, it happens where sometimes we get caught up in what level a child is. But when we stop to think about the big picture and the influences that impact comprehension, just to recall that a child is more than a level is so important. And finally, all children can access grade appropriate complex text independently and proficiently when we build background knowledge and vocabulary, and we leverage scaffolds such as close reading and technology tools to support all students. And that was sort of the overarching message of your webinar, and I just wanted to recap that because all kids can when we believe in them and give them that opportunity and the supports necessary. So Tina, I wanted to say, thank you to you for, just wanted to recap that, an amazing job. And we, as Tina mentioned at the conclusion of her portion, we definitely want to encourage you to join the Core Advocate Network. The website is there, achievethecore.org/CA-signup. It's a wonderful network of educators who just believe in instructional advocacy for all students. It's a wonderful PLN, as Tina mentioned, and it spans pre-K through 16. So you'll absolutely find not only some things to support your instruction in the classroom, but someone or someones. It's a wonderful resource to build connections that not only span state lines, but that will last for a long, long time. So definitely consider joining the Core Advocate Network, achievethecore.org/CA-signup. And we thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. This will be archived on our YouTube channel, so feel free to tweet out the link so that others who may not have been able to join us live can check it out. And next month, the folks from Kentucky will be sharing their webinar on text sets to sort of springboard off of what Tina laid the foundation to today. Kentucky will spend some time next month in October diving into text sets and their impacts on comprehension and overall student achievement. So once again, from a wet and windy New Jersey, we thank you for joining us this afternoon. And Tina, again, thank you for sharing your expertise, your knowledge, and for being a core advocate and advocate for all students. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you next month.
Thanks, Steve.